Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel, and to this week's video, still in our Scotland mini-series. Today we ventured only 7 miles away, a short distance from our last video at Dryborough Abbey, to one of the most evocative and remarkable sites on the Scottish borders. This Peel Tower scales high up on a hill and dominates over the Tweed Valley. What's more interesting about this particular tower is the story behind it, the story which I will tell you as we explore. So why not join us as we discover Smailholm Tower? After a short but steep hike to reach the tower's entrance, you get to see the outskirts of the land across the way for miles. This view is absolutely incredible, and it only gets better from above. But back in its heyday, this view would have been dreary, with little to no buildings of homes or signs of life, with vast and unforgiving open moorlands. After all, this was the land of the Border reivers. The Border reivers were lost raiders who were amongst the Anglo-Scottish border from around the 13th to the 17th century. They had little regard for nationality and were made up both from Scottish and English people. The term reiver means to raid, rob and plunder. They proudly wore steel bonnets and a quilted jacket of leather sewn in with plates of metal, or horn to protect their bodies during bloody battles. Normally a reiver would carry a variety of weapons, including swords, axes and daggers, but typically the preferred weapon of choice was the border lance or the long spear. The history of the Border reivers has many similarities to that of the American Wild West. It produced its share of outlaws and broken men, corrupt officials, greed, misery, and struggle, all for survival. Arson, murder, raiding were all a commonplace. Reiving was an illegal but highly profitable activity, indulged in by generations of Scots and English families on either side of a hotly disputed border. Cattle were a valuable possession, representing a source of food as well as breeding stock, and their loss spelt years of hardship for the landlords and their tenants. Their unfortunate owners, having lost their livelihood, were lucky if their house or castle wasn't razed to the ground as well. These times produced its great characters, such as Kinmont Willie, Johnny Armstrong, Little Jock Elliot, and many others. It produced some embellished stories and some great folklore tales too. One of the more famous reivers was Johnny Armstrong of Gilnockie. He was one of the leading 16th century reivers who was constantly causing trouble for King James V of Scotland, who was looking for a way to calm the unruly borderlands. The king tricked Johnny into meeting him at Carlinrigg, where he was then hung along with his fellow reivers. During this time though, Johnny begs for his mercy, but the king brands him a traitor and refuses to spare his life. As we entered inside, we were met with the ticket office, where we were given a short intro into Smailholm Tower, and we were able to take a wander around the small on-site exhibition that Historic Scotland have cleverly put on for people to view. The tower stands 5 stories high, reaching to 65 feet on a rectangular plan, with thick walls over 2 metres dense. The material that was used was roughly cut volcanic black rock, dressed with red sandstone at the corners, on the doors and the windows, and some of the other features. Smailholm Tower was built with security being at the topmost priority, as it only had one entrance at ground level, through the southern wall. This was protected once by an outer wooden door and an inner iron gate which we walk through today. What's interesting is throughout the visit we'll be able to peek out of the windows for wonderful views across, but these windows were always small and most of them had iron grills for extra protection. Built in the 15th century, like all Scottish peel towers, it was designed to protect occupants from English raids. But despite its violent past, it is now one of the best preserved peel towers in Scotland. The Peel Tower also served as a watchtower, to be able to look out for any English attacks, where the fires would be lit by the English army in the distance. Smailholm Tower was originally constructed as a defensive stronghold during a turbulent era of border conflicts by the Pringles of Smailholm. The Pringles were a powerful local family who held a profitable position of authority in the area. They were squires of the powerful Black Douglases, who ruled very much of the borders. Smailholm has 5 floors altogether. The lowest of the 2 were used mainly for storage and were accessible from the entrance doorway, but the upper floors were reached by the spiral staircase that we use now in the south-east corner of the tower. The clockwise upward direction of the stair is commonly believed to have given the advantage to a sword-wielding defender if need be. The stores on the lower 2 floors were separated from the living area by a stone vault. This stone vault helped stabilise the lofty tower, but it also reduced the risk of fire. What's interesting about this is the access to the upper floors is that they installed a hatch through the vault that enabled the servants of the tower to move important items between the floors and up to the hall above. The hall on the 3rd floor served as the main public room. It was an all-purpose chamber used for meals, socialising and administration. Mostly used by the lord and his family for dining. It was also generously lit by windows that were fitted with some lovely stone seats, perfect to sit in and see the outside. This was with the exception to the northern side, where there is a large beautiful stone fireplace. What I really love about visiting castles and towers like this one is imagining how it would have been decorated and furnished. The walls would have been whitewashed, plastered, and draped with coloured wall hangings and trophies, and the family's crests. The floor above the hall would have been the Lord's private chamber, very similar in layout to the hall downstairs, but without an east-facing window, and with a much smaller fireplace. You definitely can see how small and intimate these rooms would have been, but as a private chamber that's exactly what you would want. The top floor dates from the rebuilding of the mid-1500s, but like I mentioned earlier, there is actually no evidence of the original layout. But this top floor more than likely was a place where the rooms would have provided additional guests to be able to stay here, or for other members of the family needing their own space. This also gave access to the battlements. The Lords of Smailholm, along with all of his peers in the Scottish borders, were required to keep watch night and day and with no exceptions. This addition was likely in response to an Act of Council of 1587, which required every landowner in the borders to keep watch day and night and light a beacon fire to warn of trouble. In the early 17th century, Smailholm was purchased by the Scott family of Harden. The Scots built another, smaller dwelling inside the barnkin, probably replacing the earlier guest houses and kitchen. This small dwelling was later torn down, leaving only the late medieval tower. The Scots then leased Smailholm to a relative, Walter Scott, known as Beardy. Beardy Scott is better known to history as the grandfather of author Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott was one of Scotland's well-known, legendary figures. He was born in Edinburgh in 1771 and gained fame as an influential novelist, historian and poet. His connection with Smailholm is quite significant, and inside the tower there is plenty to read about his life and his wonderful work. The links with Scott began in 1773, when he became very poorly as a child. His parents sent him from Edinburgh to his grandmother's at Sandy Knowe farmhouse, nearby the tower. It was there that his grandmother and his aunt entertained and amused him with tales of the border countryside, whilst he was recovering from polio. The folklore legends that surrounded the border reivers and the tower absolutely fascinated Scott, He drew from these myths and tales and skillfully wrote masterpieces and novels to inspire others. In his final years, Scott actually paid an emotional visit to Smailholm shortly before his passing in 1832, emphasising the enduring significance that this historic site held in his life and in his literacy journey. Smailholm really blew my mind. This place is full to the brim with stories, tales and turbulence from the border years. But it's also such a beautiful place to enjoy an afternoon out, wandering in the footsteps of some fascinating people, but also getting to experience just how incredible the power of the tower actually once was, giving you a trip back in time to those frightful and unforgiving times. Even if you decide not to take a trip inside, the twist and turn walker trails make you feel like you've set off on a mini castle adventure and are ready to explore the unknown. That in itself is a great experience. So if you've enjoyed our video today, please be sure to hit that like button. Consider joining us over on the channel by subscribing, joining our Patreon or becoming a channel member to help us continue to share more with you all. We want to say a massive thank you to all of our Patreons and channel members for all of their support. So we'll see you in the next one for the last part of our Scotland mini-series. Till next time.